So we've already been talking here a minute, but so we've talked about the American Revolution. We've talked about the Articles of Confederation. Now, well, so the U.S. Constitution, as we've touched on a few weeks ago, wasn't our first government, right? 1776, they declare their independence from Britain. The American colonists say, we don't want to be part of Britain anymore. They write the Declaration of Independence. They declare that they are an independent nation. Britain, of course, says, no, no way, and so they fight a war. But if the Americans win that war, America becomes a country. Their first government is under what they wrote something called the Articles of Confederation, which was very focused on kind of a loose connection between all the states. They wanted the states to be super powerful in the Articles of Confederation. And so, but that didn't, so they did that for about 10 years, 10 years, and it wasn't working. There was problems with it. What happened was during that Articles of Confederation period, there was a couple of rebellions, just citizens rebelling. And so people were upset about things. And I guess they had the American Revolution. They just were in the mood to rebel. And so there's an armed rebellion. There's a crowd of men, I think up in Massachusetts, that stormed a courthouse, took over a courthouse. Well, you want a strong government to react to that, right? But there wasn't a strong national government. The national government was very loose, just kind of holding all the states together very loosely, and the states had all the power. Well, they needed to react to these rebellions with something strong, and there just wasn't a strong national government. So they said, okay, this Articles of Confederation government isn't working. We got to go back to the drawing board, come up with something new. So they got together, and as we've talked about, they had a constitutional convention. Every state was represented by people. They were all men, all white men at the time. But they wrote the United States Constitution. Okay. It did not involve what we're going to talk about today called the Bill of Rights. They passed the Constitution. It was ratified by the states, as we've talked about in the past. It didn't have the Bill of Rights, but they promised to write a Bill of Rights, the rights of citizens. Okay, so that's where we're going to pick up today. A lot of people don't even know about the Articles of Confederation because it was our first type of government. It didn't work. It failed. And they wrote something else, and now that's what we have today. The Constitution is like our second try at having a government. And it's now lasted, 200 some plus years, 230 years, whatever. So that's where we're going to pick up today. Okay, so let me pull up this reading and zoom out a little bit. Okay, so we're going to look at this reading, the Bill of Rights, which refers to the first 10 amendments. Now we've talked about amendments. What was the amendment that we've talked about before? Did what?
About the rules about alcohol.
Prohibition.
Yeah, alcohol prohibition, right? That was in the 1920s. I think the 18th Amendment made prohibition, and then it lasted for about 10 years, and then they made another amendment to undo it, to change the Constitution back, to reverse the changes of prohibition, which I think was the 21st Amendment. So, roughly the 1920s was the period of prohibition. That was a constitutional amendment. These first 10 we call the Bill of Rights, but they are just constitutional amendments. Now they passed all at once, kind of like as a package deal. And so we're going to cover a little bit about the history and how that happened here. And then we're going to look at what those 10 amendments are. What do they say? Okay. First, let me try, as we've tried in the past, let's try to watch a video here. Okay, now I know this isn't super loud, so I'm going to turn it up as high as I can, and then it has captions at the bottom, which should help. So if you can't quite hear it, you can at least read along. But this is it's 4 minutes, it's not a long video, but it kind of lays out what the Bill of Rights do, what they are. Okay, then after that, we're going to look at the reading and look at the history of it and kind of also look at what they do. So let me turn this volume up, and I got to unplug my headphones, and then we'll go from there. Okay. All right, let me get this set here.
The Bill of Rights, as we know it today, were the first 10 amendments.
I can't hear anything.
I can't see or hear anything.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you and I can see the screen, but I can't hear anything from the video.
Okay.
And the video is like frozen.
Well, yeah, I didn't. I need to make sure you guys can at least hear it a little bit. Let me push, and you can tell me if you can hear it.
As we know it today, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. And these
Yes, I can
amendments.
hear some sounds, but it's not clear enough to understand.
Yeah, I'm with her.
It's not clear? Okay. Well,
Yeah.
all right, we can skip the video.
What if you just repeat, you can put this video on and just repeat what they say, and we can hear you really nice.
Well, I think, hold on, let me plug back in here. Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we can skip it. I'll put the link in the reading. Actually, I do. I have it at the top here, so you guys could watch this. It's just an introduction. It's not a big deal if we don't watch it. Well, Carla, thanks for logging in there. Yeah, we just I don't know. There's got to be a way for me to show a video that you guys would be able to see. I'll have to ask the other teachers and monkey around with it and see. But okay, it's no big deal because we were going to do all that, see all that information anyway. So let's tackle the reading then. Again, it's a bit of history, and then we look at what those 10 amendments do. Okay, so the first paragraph says the first national election. Now this is under. They wrote the Constitution. It was ratified in I think 1787, or maybe they wrote it in 1787. Anyway, so think back. So they wrote a constitution that comes up with the three branches of government. They say there's going to be a Senate and a House of Representatives. There's going to be a Supreme Court. There's going to be a executive branch with a president. Now it's easy to say those things, but then you have to do it. You got to pick who. You got to decide where is the government going to be. And so there's an interesting history that they needed a capital. They needed a capital city. So they created Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. was not a city. It didn't exist. It was a city created out of nothing to be the capital of the national capital of the new country, the United States of America. So they say, okay, there's going to be the executive mansion that we now call the White House. That's where the president's going to live. We're going to build a Capitol building. That's where the two houses of Congress are going to be. So think back. It's really interesting. I find it to be an interesting period of history because they're creating, they're building, literally, really building a government. So they have to have elections. It's not, today elections are to replace people. Back then, elections were to choose the first person. I think that's kind of interesting. So it says the first national election occurred in 1789. Along with President Washington, voters elected a large number of supporters of the Constitution. In fact, almost half of the 91 members of the first Congress had helped to write or ratify the Constitution. Okay, now, there's another history that you could study. There's Federalists and Anti-Federalists, and I don't remember if those words come up now. But Federalists were people who supported this new Constitution. They said, okay, I like this new government. This works. Anti-Federalists were people who had a problem with this new Constitution. Maybe they don't like having two houses of Congress. Maybe, they don't like it for some reason. Now, so this is saying a large number of supporters of the Constitution were, it says almost half of the 91 members of the first Congress were people who helped write or ratify the Constitution. So not everybody liked this new Constitution, just like today, not everybody agrees on everything. But it won the votes, it was ratified, and it was now the new government that they were going to have. So they elected, every state had elections and national elections. And they voted President George Washington to be the first president, and they voted 91 members into the new Congress. 2 senators from every state, two senators from every state, and then representatives for the House of Representatives, which goes by population of each state. Okay, so Amy Lynn, could you read paragraph 2?
Sure. An immediate issue that the new Congress took up was how to modify the Constitution. Representatives were responding to calls for amendments that had emerged as a chief issue during the ratification process. Crucial states of Massachusetts, Virginia, and New York, among others, had all ultimately supported the Constitution, but only with the expectation that explicit protections for individual rights would be added to the highest law of the land. Now that supporters of the Constitution controlled the federal government, what would they do?
Okay, thank you. So they wrote the Constitution, and then every state, and they said it's got to be every single state, colony, state, whatever you want to call them, every state individually, like their state capital government, the state government, had to approve or ratify the Constitution. So Delaware's state motto, we never think about Delaware. I mean, when was the last time you even heard anybody talk about the state of Delaware? Maybe if you're over in Philadelphia. But Delaware is not a very big state, right? We don't consider it to be super popular, super important today. But does anybody know the motto of the state of Delaware? Or what it's nicknamed? The state. Pennsylvania is the Keystone State. Does anybody know the nickname?
I did not know that.
What's Delaware?
The first state.
The first state. Do you know why?
Because they were the first to ratify the Constitution.
Yeah, exactly. So once the Constitution was written, every state had to agree to it, to approve it, to ratify it. Delaware was the first one. And so Delaware becomes, they said, okay, you're not a state in the United States of America until you ratify the Constitution. And Delaware was the first one to do it, and so they call themselves the first state. But there were some states that waited, and they said, well, we we really don't like it the way it is, and we got a problem with it. So Massachusetts, Virginia, and New York waited 2 years almost before their states ratified and agreed to the new Constitution, because they were worried. So people in those states, the leaders of those states, were worried that there wasn't enough, what we're saying here, explicit protections for individual rights. Okay, think back historically. They're coming out of they rebelled against the British government, which was a king, and a king, not exactly, but a king can generally do whatever he wants and treat the citizens unfairly, and they felt that they had been treated unfairly by the British king. And so they're trying to avoid that problem. They said, okay, let's build a government that isn't going to turn into a king, a monarchy. So they were concerned that this new government didn't protect the rights of individual people. Now it says they wanted explicit protections of individual rights. Does anybody know? That's a good word. What does explicit mean?
I have no idea.
Like clear.
Clear, yeah.
Clear, yeah. Explicit means well, kind of the opposite is implicit. If I imply something, that means I don't really come out and say it, right? I'm sort of hinting at it. If I imply, if I say something, if we're going to have dinner and you ask me, where do I want to go for dinner? And I don't exactly say, but I kind of imply that I'd like to go out for pizza, but I don't really say pizza, but I kind of hint at it, and you kind of have to gather the information. Then I'm saying it implicitly. I'm communicating implicit. If it's explicit, it means I say I want to go out for pizza. I'm being explicit. I'm saying it, yes, like you said, very clear, but it means I'm using those words. I'm saying it very clearly. So they wanted explicit protections. Don't just say that people have. Let's see what those rights are exactly.
I think someone's background noise is really loud, so I'm having a hard time hearing you.
Okay, yeah, I think that was Nadia there. I hit mute for you, Nadia. Yeah, explicit means.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I thought I was on mute.
That's okay. Yeah, they wanted explicit protections. And as we're going to see, if we're going to scroll down here, and we're going to see explicit rules, amendments added here. Okay, the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting free exercise or abridging the right of the freedom of speech or of the press. This is explicit. They're coming out and saying it. Okay, so these states wanted explicit protections for individual rights because they were afraid of the government becoming too powerful, abusing the people, just as they had been abused by the British king. Jasmine, would you read paragraph 3?
Yes. The legal tradition of having a precise statement of individual rights has deep roots in Anglo-American custom, so it's not surprising that the first Congress amended the Constitution by adding what became known as the Bill of Rights.
Okay. Anglo-American. Anglo is kind of the same word as English. It comes from the same word. So Anglo-American means this, this time in history is there's Americans now. There's a new country called America, but a lot of them are really British or come from British parents or grandparents. And so it's very Anglo-American. If people say that today, generally, well, you don't hear it much, but if somebody were to say that, what they really mean is probably white people, white Americans. But Anglo, it has the same, A-N-G, E-N-G, has the same root word as English, so it means people from England. At that time, even most of the Americans were English people. or a few years before that had been English. So in Anglo-American custom, there is, if you look at Britain, at England, there is a custom of writing out clear laws. Not every country has that. Probably today most do, but back then, 200 years ago, not every country has clear written down laws. But England had for a while, and so that was a tradition that they wanted to keep up. Okay, so they write what then becomes known as the Bill of Rights. Carla, could you read paragraph 4?
Yes, let me zoom in. James Madison, now a member of Congress from Virginia, once again took the leading role, crafting proposed amendments that would be sent to the states for approval. Madison skillfully reviewed numerous proposals and examples from state constitutions and ultimately selected 19 potential amendments to the Constitution. In the end, 10 amendments were ratified in 1791.
Okay, thank you. So this is a picture of James Madison here. He wrote much of the Constitution, when they sat down to agree upon it. So his nickname is the father of the Constitution. He also took a leading role in writing the amendments. I mean, people came up with the ideas, but then somebody had to write it, so they gave that job to him. He came up with, and probably a small group of people, came up with 19 potential amendments. And then in a group, they debated them, they argued them, they decided on 10. It'd be interesting to know, and I don't know that I've ever really read anything about ones they rejected. What were the 9 ideas that they got rid of? I don't know. But they come with 10 amendments, and they're ratified in 1791. So in 1791, which is a couple of years after, 2 years after the first election, 2, 3, 4 years after the Constitution is written. A couple of years after that, 1791, we have our 10 amendments. So it says 10 amendments. These first 10 amendments to the Constitution became known as the Bill of Rights and still stand as both the symbol and foundation of American ideals of individual liberty, limited government, and the rule of law. Okay, these are concerns that they had back then, because their thinking, always in the back of their minds, was we don't want this to turn into a tyrant, an unfair ruler, a king. So they protect the ideals of individual liberty, limited government, a government that is limited, can't do whatever it wants, and the rule of law. Everybody follows the law. Most of the Bill of Rights concerns legal protections for those accused of crimes, which is interesting, and we're going to look at that. Nadia, could you read paragraph 6?
Yes. For instance, the first through 8 amendments provide protection from unreasonable search and seizure, the privilege against self-incrimination, and the right to the fair and speedy jury trial that will be free from unusual punishment.
Okay, we're going to look at those in a second. We'll take a good look. Can you read paragraph 7 too?
The First Amendment, perhaps the broadest and most famous of the Bill of Rights, established a range of political and civil rights, including those of free speech, assembly, press, and religion.
Okay. All right, very good. We'll take a close look at those in a second. And Tolulope, could you read 8? I want to read 8 and 9.
Okay. The last 2 amendments, respectively, spell out that this list of individual protections is not meant to exclude other ones, and by contrast set forth that all powers claimed by the federal government had to be explicitly stated in the Constitution. While the Bill of Rights created no deep challenge to federal authority, It did respond to the central anti-federalist fear that the Constitution would unleash an oppressive central government too distant from the people to be controlled. By responding to this opposition and following through on the broadly expressed desire for amendments that emerged during the ratification process, the Bill of Rights helped to secure a broad political support for the new national government. A first major domestic issue had been successfully resolved.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, it was the reason we have the Bill of Rights is because those states, where were they? Up at the top, Massachusetts, Virginia, and New York, and there was others, but those were the last three of the original 13 states to sign on to ratify the Constitution. They held out because they were concerned that there wasn't what we now call the Bill of Rights. So they got a promise. It wasn't written yet, but they got a promise to say, okay, if you ratify the Constitution, first thing that Congress is going to do, first thing we're going to do is write what's now the Bill of Rights. So it's compromise, and I think America works best, our government works best when people are compromising. I'm going to do what you want, and sometimes you do what I want, or sometimes we meet in the middle. You know, the best governments, I think, are when they're compromising. You can't always get everything you want, but sometimes if you meet in the middle, you get some of what you want. You know. So let's look at. Let me scroll down here. So in the red, and I'll send this out later. In the red is just a paraphrase of the Bill of Rights. Okay, this isn't the actual text. This is just kind of in my own words, or I copied it from someplace. But in somebody's own words, this is what they do. But then I do have in blue the full text of the Bill of Rights. Now, you'd think that, oh, these are amendments. They must be very explicit. You know, the freedom of speech, it must really say like what you're allowed to say and what you're not allowed to say, what is protected by the First Amendment, what's not protected. It's not. It is like the freedom of speech is these 5 words, like abridging the freedom of speech. Congress may not do anything that abridges the freedom of speech. Now, who gets to decide what those words mean? Whose job is it to decide how to use the Bill of Rights, what the Bill of Rights means? Whose job is it to do that?
The
Like
Senate.
judicial branch?
Yeah, it's the judicial
No?
branch, exactly. Yeah. The Supreme Court, if you go all the way up through the process of the judicial branch, it is the judicial branch's job, the Supreme Court, the courts, to decide what these words mean. Okay? Freedom of religion. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. Respecting doesn't mean like respect. It means kind of a law about an establishment of religion. We do not have a national religion, okay, of the government. I mean, certainly the country is majority. I think the most people in a religion are Christians. So a lot of people call us a Christian nation because a lot of people are Christian. But our country, our government, does not officially have a religion. Whereas throughout history and even the world today, you can see countries that do have a national religion. America does not. It's in the Constitution. It's in the Bill of Rights, and now amended into the Constitution. America will not have a national religion. Okay, but what does that mean? So you have freedom of religion, or it says, or that prohibit the free practicing, the free exercise thereof. So you, as an individual, can practice whatever religion you choose. Okay, but what does that mean? You have cases, let's say abortion. Okay. Now don't worry, we're not going to talk all about abortion, but just as a illustration, of how complicated things are. You have nurses, let's say a nurse works at a hospital where they do abortions. Now, abortion today is legal, but let's say a nurse is assigned to work in the wing of the hospital where they do abortions, but that nurse doesn't want to. Okay, so the courts get to decide where the line is. Okay, that nurse's job is to do what the hospital tells her to do, right? That's the nurse's job. But that nurse has freedom of religion, and if she feels that abortion is wrong and she refuses to work in that wing of the hospital, then who's right? You know, it's a tough situation. And of course, we can think of a million examples where somebody's just religious beliefs are opposed to something that they should do, maybe as their job or whatever. So it's the court's job to answer that question. And they look at the Constitution, they look at the laws, they look at existing laws, they look at past precedent of how other courts have answered similar questions before. And of course, you know, it's complicated, and you got to. That's why the best judges are like geniuses to think about these complicated questions. But you're right. This is very look at it. It's super short. Okay. The Second Amendment is the right to bear arms, right? The right we have today to own guns. But of course, there's all kinds of strings attached to that one, right? You can't go out and buy a rocket launcher or a tank as an individual citizen. So there's limits. You know, we have background checks, but that's all based on a very short sentence. The Second Amendment, short little thing. The right of the people to keep and bear arms. Now, based on that is a whole world of specific laws, state by state, city by city. Okay, different types of guns are regulated in different ways, but it all comes from these very short amendments. Now, you could say, like, those founding fathers were real idiots to give us such a short little thing that we're going to argue about forever. But, you know, maybe they had, I don't know, they had to be short. They couldn't foresee the future, you know, they couldn't see the future, so they couldn't anticipate every problem ever. Okay, so let's go down through. I'm getting sidetracked. I'm getting too excited here. So let's look at what the amendments are. Okay, there's 10 amendments. Some, about half, are for individuals, and half are for individuals accused of a crime. Shockingly, 4 of them, as somebody read up above, 4 of them are about people accused of crime. Now, until you commit a crime or are accused of a crime and you're before a court, you don't really, I mean, in our daily lives, we're not super concerned about all these things until you are in court, and then suddenly you care about them a lot. But it's interesting to think historically, look back. This wasn't, you know, these were chosen by people for a reason. And if they chose them and selected these for a reason at that time. So it's an interesting look into this history. In 1787, 1791, they were passed. This was what was on their minds. These were the rights they wanted to protect. This was what was important to them. So First Amendment, the famous ones: freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly. We can assemble in groups, we can protest, and freedom to petition. You can petition the government, sometimes online especially. Sometimes somebody will knock on your door and ask you to sign a petition. And if it's something you believe in, then go ahead and do it. In other countries, you put your name on that petition And then it gets turned into the government and they say, look, we have 100,000 signatures on this petition. We want you to change this law. In America, hopefully that gets somebody's attention. They say, oh boy, 100,000 people are concerned about this topic, and I'm gonna look into changing the law. In other countries, they take that list of 100,000 people, and guess what? Somebody's going to knock on your door and arrest you because they don't have those freedoms. Okay, so that's what that one means. Second Amendment, right to keep and bear arms. Arms meaning weapons, guns, generally. Okay. Third Amendment, right not to quarter or house soldiers during a time of war. This was not something we're concerned about today, so nobody ever talks about their Third Amendment rights. Doesn't happen. Because back then, during the Revolutionary War, think of how the Revolutionary War was being fought. It was British soldiers in America fighting Americans. So if they come into your town, if the British are attacking your town and your town militia fights, maybe there's a battle, they lose, the British come into town and they need a place to sleep. So they pound on your door and they make you feed and house them for a day or a week or as long as they're in town. So they wanted, and that was a right that the British Army had in the American colonies. And so they say, okay, Third Amendment, bam, we are giving the people a right not to have that happen. You do not have to house soldiers in your house, feed and shelter them. Okay, again, not something we ever think about today. Fourth Amendment, though, is right to be protected from unreasonable search and seizure. Cops can't pull you over. They can't, now I don't know exactly the details here, but they can't pull you over for speeding and then ask you to open your trunk and look inside your trunk of your car unless they have a reason to believe that you're breaking a law of some kind. If they see drugs in your back seat, then they're going to say, hey, I want to look in your trunk. But if you're just speeding or you accidentally run through a stop sign, there's no reason for them to search your car or pound on your door at home and arrest you without reason. Protection from unreasonable search and seizure. Fifth Amendment, now we start to get into the people who are accused of a crime. Okay. A lot of times when somebody's accused of a crime, it's because they did a crime, right? But sometimes people are wrongfully accused, or you're accused and a court has not proven you've done it yet. And so looking back historically, they wanted to protect those people's rights. You have rights, even if you've been accused of a crime. You're a murderer. You still have rights. Okay, so that's what they list here. Rights in criminal cases, including due process, which means they have to go through the process of a court proceeding, and protection from self-incrimination. That's the Fifth Amendment. If anybody ever hear somebody say they plead the Fifth?
Yeah.
Okay, now I don't know exactly how that works, but there is a right that you do not have to. Now I don't really understand it, to be honest, but here in the Fifth Amendment,
You don't
Is that about
have to, like, say you have to go to court. You don't have to say anything, pretty much. You just say, I plead the Fifth Amendment, and you just don't say anything. Like, especially if you have to go against family members or someone that you're in fear of.
Yeah. Yes.
or
Protection from
is
self-incrimination.
that about something like, for example, parents know kids do something wrong, like probably some crime, and just father decided to take everything for himself, and he can go to the court and say, okay, guys, I did this, but he did not. His son did. Is that about this? Taking someone's crime for yourself?
No, that wouldn't be.
No?
That wouldn't be it. And you certainly can. It happens all the time. You are allowed to admit to a crime. If you murder somebody, you're allowed to to plead innocent, plead guilty in the court. You say, yes, I did kill that person. I am guilty. Okay.
Okay,
So
but
it's not
what if
saying
you
that
did
can't
not do
happen.
this? But yeah, what if someone else did this, but you just try to take his guilty
You'll
for
just be
yourself?
Take the blame. That's a different,
you'll
yeah.
just be taking the blame. Yeah.
And sometimes people do that. You're right. In that scenario, a father, I think it does happen. People for lots of different reasons will say they did a crime that somebody else did. Yeah, like you said, maybe to keep a son out of jail, or all kinds
Or
of
maybe someone paid for this?
that can happen. That's a different situation though. That's not what they mean here by self-incrimination. Now that's illegal. It's not. You're not allowed to say you did to take the blame for something somebody else did. And if you get in trouble, if you get caught, if they can prove that you did that, then you've committed another crime. But no, that's not the self-incrimination
So
they're
to
talking.
plead the fifth is essentially just to not confirm or deny that you did the crime.
I believe so.
Yep.
Believe so. If so, you say to the police, if you think I did that murder, you got to prove it. You can't just ask me to self-incriminate. You've got to have other evidence. Did somebody else see me? Do you have a weapon? Can you prove that I owned the gun that did it? There has to be some other evidence than just asking me. I believe, yeah, that's what that means. And you're allowed to say that. You're allowed to plead the Fifth Amendment and just say, I don't have to answer that question. Because they'll just say, did you commit this murder? And you can say, yeah, I'm not saying what I did, or I'm not saying I didn't.
It's just like saying no contest.
Well,
Instead
yeah,
of
I'm not sure.
guilty or not guilty, it's no
Yeah,
contest.
it's similar. Yeah. And then it says no person can be tried for a serious crime without the indictment of a grand jury. So a grand jury is a jury that they have kind of like before the full trial, just to like say, is there enough evidence to go to court here? Like, okay, a murder's been committed. We think Matt Manfred did it. Is there enough evidence for us to have a trial? That's what the grand jury does. Okay. Now you can say, well, that's kind of weird. Why don't they just go to trial? But that's the way they did things back then. That's the way we still do things now. Okay. Sixth Amendment also about people accused of a crime. You have a right to a speedy and public, can't be secret, a public trial by an impartial jury. Impartial means your mother can't be on your jury, nor can the person, your neighbor who hates your guts, isn't allowed to be on the jury. It has to be impartial. Right to an attorney and right to confront witnesses. These are rights that don't exist in some other countries, but and they didn't necessarily exist at that time, let's say in Britain. And so they said, boy, we want to guarantee that Americans have these rights. Seventh Amendment, right to a trial by jury in civil cases. Okay, so not a crime, but a civil case. Maybe you're suing somebody for money or something. That's going to have a jury as well. Right to not face excessive bail, fines, or cruel and unusual punishment. You can't fine me, you can't, give me a fine of $1 million for running through a stop sign. Okay. Cruel and unusual punishment, we talk about. Jails have, and this comes up in having safe jails. Okay. You're not allowed to just openly beat prisoners in a jail. That would be cruel and unusual punishment. You're also not allowed to torture people to get them to confess to crimes. That's a cruel and unusual punishment. That's the Eighth Amendment. Okay, so 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's look. 1, 2, 3, 4 are kind of in a group. This is the rights of individuals. Okay, again, Third Amendment, nobody's really super concerned about these days. 5, 6, 7, 8 are rights of people who have been accused of a crime. And again, think historically, they put these in there for a reason because they were not being given these rights by Britain. Ninth Amendment, 10th Amendment, a little bit different. Ninth Amendment, there are other rights besides the ones listed in the Bill of Rights, and the federal government cannot violate those rights. That's kind of weird because you're like, well, why don't you just say what they are, you know? But what they're saying here is this list can be added to. That's what they're saying. We reserve the right to add to this list in the future. That's why they included the Ninth Amendment. Because some people were concerned, well, if you list them all, if you make a list, then people are going to say, well, that's all the rights there are. So they put in the Ninth Amendment that says this isn't necessarily all the rights. Okay, 10th Amendment, similar. All powers not given to the national government or prohibited to the states are reserved to states or to the people. So and this is also in the Constitution. There's earlier in the actual body of the Constitution. There's that clause that says any power not given to the national government belongs to the states. So they list the powers of the national government. Congress can declare war. The president can negotiate treaties. But any power not explicitly given in the Constitution, or now the Bill of Rights, belongs to the states or to the people. So they're kind of just, the 9th and 10th Amendments are just kind of like leaving the door open for the future because they don't know what the future is going to hold. And certainly today, it's 200 years later and things are very different. Life is very different. And they knew they had to put in the 9th and 10th Amendment to sort of leave the door open, give themselves wiggle room to change things in the future. Okay, and down below, I'll send this out. This is it. These amendments aren't super long, and if I would encourage you to look them over. They're easy to understand. It's not super complicated. Some of the sentences can be long, but it's not complicated language. And it's interesting to see what was important to them. As they sat and they said, okay, we know we don't want to do things the way the British treated us. So how are we going to do it differently? And this is how they did it differently. So the Bill of Rights is the first 10 amendments. Then they went a good long while before they started adding more amendments. And now, of course, today there's 27. I think the 27th Amendment is that 1992? I think we've been a while since we've had an amendment. Okay, so any questions about the Bill of Rights?
No, it was pretty
No, thank you.
Yeah. So it's important.
I'm good. It was a good.
I'm sorry, Carla. What'd you say?
I say it was a good class.
Oh, good. Yeah, I mean, people spend their whole lives studying the Bill of Rights and what do these things mean, and the Second Amendment, right to bear arms, or First Amendment, freedom of speech. If you dig deep, you can come up with a million different topics and angles and nuances to these problems and the questions. But broadly speaking, that's the Bill of Rights. These are the rights we have. And it's interesting, I think, to look back on history and say, okay, why do we have them? Why were they written? When were they written? Who wrote them? What were those people thinking and experiencing? And why did they choose these 10 things? So there you go, the Bill of Rights. So now let's look at the timeline again. So yeah, the Bill of Rights, the Constitution. I guess I didn't put the Bill of Rights on here, but the Constitution was just before the Bill of Rights. So that's where it fits into American history. Okay, so I'll send out this reading. the link here, I always put the link that I really pull it from. Sometimes I change the words a little bit, but I always put that there. But then this second link is that video, and if you want to, maybe later, maybe this weekend, it'd be good to watch that video. It's only 4 minutes. You watch that video this weekend, and maybe that would, like, you know, remind you of the things we've discussed and help you learn it a little deeper. Okay. So thanks for logging in. We can all go and wash our hands now and have lunch, and hope everybody stays safe. And you know, if you think of something to discuss, or if you see something on the news that you think would be helpful for you and for everybody, you know, I'd love to hear suggestions anytime, because things are changing really rapidly. And this is you know, everybody thinks that you know, what are we going to be talking about in 50 years? And I think maybe it's just because I'm a history teacher. I like to think of what's going to show up in the high school history textbooks 100 years from now. And I think today and what we're experiencing, this is going to show up in the history books. This virus.
Definitely.
Now, we don't know how the story is going to end, and hopefully it ends better. You know, the best case scenario is that not that many people die, and a month from now, 3 months from now, we're all like, gee, what was the big deal? We overreacted. If we think that, that's the best, that's the happiest ending. If we all think, oh crap, we canceled school and we canceled, you know, NCAA March Madness and the basketball season. If we think, oh man, we overreacted because not many people died, that's what we want. So we'll see. We'll see what happens, but I hope everybody has a good week.
You too. Thank you.
You
Yeah.
too. Thank you.
You too.
Thank you. Have a great week.
Yeah, you
Bye.
guys. I'll send out an email later. Have a good day.
Have a
You
good day,
too.
everybody.
You too.
You too.